Speaking to Christian Kunz podcast, Howard said he expected to hear his name called on day 2 of the draft. He pointed to what happened to Sanders as the reason he didn't. Listen, bro, if somebody wanted you on day 2, they would have took your ass on day 2. Don't blame Shedeur Sanders for this. He was quoted as saying, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it kind of seems like he's pointing the finger at Shedeur Sanders for his draft slide. I think it's ridiculous, man. If somebody wanted you, then they would have took you. You wasn't getting blackballed and all this stuff that was going on to Shedeur Sanders. That wasn't going on with you, bro.
Will Howard is blaming Shedeur Sanders. Let that sink in for a second. A 6th-round pick, a guy who played 0 snaps in his entire rookie NFL season, went on a podcast and had the audacity to point the finger at Shedeur Sanders for why he fell in the 2025 NFL Draft. Not the teams that passed on him, not his own evaluation, not anything within his own control. Shedeur Sanders, the guy who was already the victim of one of the most unfair pre-draft media attacks we have seen in recent memory. Will Howard looked at all of that and said, "Yeah, that's the guy I'm going to blame." This is one of the most tone-deaf takes we have heard in a long time, and we are breaking every single bit of it down today. So here's what happened. Howard appeared on his Pittsburgh Steelers teammate Christian Kunz's podcast and started talking about his draft day experience. And then he said something that stopped everybody in their tracks. His exact words were, "I thought there was a chance that I was going to go Friday. I was hearing that. I remember talking with some of the guys from the Steelers, and it was really that whole Shedeur situation. Him sliding really hurt a lot of the other quarterbacks in our class. Just because he was ranked a little higher, so nobody wanted to take guys like me, or Riley Leonard, or Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers. We were all like late picks." So let's unpack this carefully. Howard is saying that because Shedeur Sanders, who was projected as a 1st-round pick, slid all the way to the 5th round, teams froze up on the quarterback position, and guys like Howard got pushed further down the board as a result. And look, there is a mechanical argument buried in there somewhere that has a tiny sliver of logic. When a highly rated quarterback slides unexpectedly, teams can get gun-shy about the position. That part is not completely made up. But the way Howard framed it, as if Shedeur is somehow responsible for what happened to Howard's draft stock, is where this whole thing falls apart completely. Because here is what Will Howard conveniently left out of his podcast appearance. Shedeur Sanders did not choose to slide. Shedeur Sanders was the victim of one of the most coordinated and dishonest media attacks we have seen on a quarterback prospect in years. For months before that draft, the media was pumping out story after story about Shedeur's attitude, his demeanor in pre-draft meetings, anonymous sources painting him as difficult and arrogant, and virtually none of it was backed by verified facts or documented evidence. It was a smear campaign, a full-on, sustained, anonymous source-driven smear campaign against a young man whose football ability nobody could seriously question. And that matters enormously here. Shedeur Sanders did not fall because he played poorly. He did not fall because his film was bad. He fell because a media machine decided to tear him apart before he even got to the podium. His statistics were elite. His college career was historically great. His football was not the problem. The narrative built around him was the problem. So when Will Howard says Shedeur's fall hurt his draft positioning, what he is actually saying is that the media's lies about Shedeur hurt Will Howard. And somehow, in Howard's telling of the story, the blame lands on Shedeur. Not on the dishonest narrative, not on the reporters pushing anonymous hit pieces, on Shedeur. That is not accountability. That is deflection wrapped in a victim story. Now let's talk about where Will Howard was actually projected before that draft. Because Howard tells this story like he was a surefire day 2 pick who got robbed of something that was rightfully his. The reality is much less dramatic. Howard's most common pre-draft projection was the 4th or 5th round. Some analysts had him sneaking into the 3rd round on the high end, and some had him falling to the 6th. The range was wide, but nobody in serious draft circles was making the case that Will Howard was a 2nd-round quarterback. Even the most optimistic projections had him as a late day 2 possibility at best, and that was the ceiling, not the floor. He was selected at pick 185 in the 6th round, which is 1 round lower than the rosiest projections. 1 round. And he is out here constructing a whole narrative around that 1 round as if some grave injustice was committed against him. And this is where the stats become really important. Because if you are going to go on a podcast and indirectly blame someone else for your draft position, you better make sure your football resume holds up to comparison with that person. So let us put Will Howard and Shedeur Sanders side by side and see what the numbers actually say. Will Howard spent 4 years at Kansas State before transferring to Ohio State for his final season in 2024. That final year was genuinely impressive. He threw for 4,010 yards and 35 touchdowns, completed 73% of his passes, and helped lead the Buckeyes to a national championship. His college football playoff run was strong, 8 touchdowns and 1,150 yards across 4 playoff games. Nobody is here to take that away from him. But context matters enormously. Howard was operating behind one of the most dominant offensive lines in college football history. He was sacked just 14 times the entire season. His protection was about as clean as any quarterback in the country gets. He had elite receivers, elite play calling, and an elite roster around him. He was asked to manage that machine well, and he did. But he was a game manager on a powerhouse team, not a one-man show. Now look at Shedeur Sanders across his full college career. Across 50 games at Jackson State and Colorado, Shedeur completed 70.1% of his passes for 14,353 yards, 134 touchdowns, and just 27 interceptions. That career touchdown-to-interception ratio is absurd. In his final season at Colorado alone, he completed 74% of his passes, higher than Howard, for 4,134 yards, more than Howard, and 37 touchdowns, more than Howard, against just 10 interceptions. He was named second-team AP All-American and Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. And he did all of this while getting sacked 42 times in that senior season alone, behind a patchwork offensive line, on a program that was still rebuilding, facing legitimate Power 5 competition every single week. Completion percentage, edge Shedeur. Passing yards, edge Shedeur. Touchdowns, edge Shedeur. Career interception rate over a 50-game sample, it is not even close. The guy Will Howard is blaming for his draft fall was the statistically superior quarterback prospect coming out of college. That is just the truth. But here is where the story gets truly embarrassing for Will Howard's whole argument. Let us talk about what these two quarterbacks actually did once they got to the NFL, because ultimately that is what this is all really about. Shedeur Sanders started 7 games for the Cleveland Browns as a rookie in 2025. He went 3-4 as a starter. He threw for 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns. He had a massive Week 14 performance, 364 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, plus a rushing score, against the Titans that had the entire league sitting up and paying attention. He was eventually added to the Pro Bowl roster. On one of the worst, most dysfunctional rosters in the entire NFL, Shedeur Sanders was the best quarterback option the Browns had, and he proved it every time he was on the field. Among every quarterback who took snaps for Cleveland in 2025, Shedeur had the best record and the most impressive individual performances. He showed up. He competed. He gave that broken franchise something real to build on. Will Howard appeared in 1 game in 2025. He played 0 snaps. 0. Not a single meaningful play in the entire regular season. Howard suffered a hand injury in training camp, missed the entire preseason, and spent his rookie year watching from the sideline while a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers ran the Pittsburgh offense. If Will Howard genuinely believes he deserved to go higher in that draft, the only way to prove it is to get on the field and perform. Not to go on a podcast and redirect blame toward a guy who was already wronged once by the narrative machine and then went out and played through it with class. Shedeur Sanders did not hurt Will Howard's draft stock. The system that lied about Shedeur did. And Shedeur had nothing to do with that. Howard needs to look in the mirror on this one, because the numbers, the NFL record, and the basic facts of the situation are simply not on his side.